Hi friends, I wanted to take you along the journey as I made some easy artisan sourdough bread. Here I am getting some starter that's been in the refrigerator, measuring out some for a bowl, and I'm going to feed it, and then I'll put that container back in the fridge for another day, and then that discard that I put in the bowl will sit overnight, and then it'll be ready to bake. I'm just measuring out some feed for both of them, the one that's going back in the fridge and the one that we're going to use in this bread. I think sometimes people make it harder than it has to be to bake sourdough. It's not that hard. And you can see with my feeding, I'm not really measuring a whole lot, just kind of putting the same amount of flour and the same amount of water into that starter jar. And then we'll give it a good stir. You don't really have to have fancy equipment, or it's just not as difficult as some people make it out to be. I'm just going to stir this starter good, just fed it, and then we'll put the lid back and we'll just stick it back in the fridge, and it'll be there waiting to be used the next time we want to bake bread. I always try to get a napkin and clean up the edge of that jar, because sometimes if you leave it up on the jar, it can mold. So it's better if you can keep it clean. And then I don't fasten it tight, but that's ready to go back in the fridge for another day. This bowl was the discard that we just fed that we will actually use for our bread tomorrow. So we're just going to stir it well. And I will say the whisk that I'm using is called a Danish whisk. They're not very expensive, less than $10, but they are wonderful for mixing breads. Much easier than a traditional whisk. So if you had to buy anything, that's one thing I would encourage you to have. We're just going to mix it up good. You can kind of see the consistency, like a thick pancake dough. And then we're going to cover it. And this is a little trick that I learned from someone on YouTube, I think. Instead of doing saran wrap, I can get a 15-pack of clear shower caps for less than $1. And so I'm going to clean this bowl up a little bit, and I'll just pop that shower cap on and set it aside overnight and let it rise and double, and it'll be really ready to bake with the next day. So here we are the next day, and I am using my kitchen scale to measure things out. This particular recipe calls for 7 ounces of an active sourdough starter, 3 cups of bread flour, 9 ounces of water that's room temperature, a teaspoon of sugar, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And you can see I mix my starter and water together first and just stir it together really well. And then we'll start adding flour. And again, it's 3 cups. You can measure it out, it's about 15 ounces, but I didn't measure it this time. Your breads usually will be more consistent if you use a scale for everything, but this was just bread I was making for the family. So there's my 3 cups of flour, and I'm using bread flour. It has a higher protein than all-purpose, but you can use all-purpose, you can use wheat, just a variety. So we're going to mix that in, hydrate that flour. Trying to get a better view here. So So just continue to mix that, let the water soak in. Make sure you don't have any pockets of dry flour down in the bottom. Sometimes if the bowl has like a little curvature to it, it can be hard to get those little pockets of dry flour incorporated. You can see it's kind of a shaggy dough, stiff, shaggy dough. And now we're going to add, we still need to add our sugar and our salt. Just using my hands to pull it together a little better. And I'm using that same shower cap. It works wonderfully. And I'll just cover it and we'll let it sit probably like 30 minutes up to an hour, and just let that water incorporate into the dough. Here we are back, and now we'll put the take that lid off. If you'll kind of wet your fingers, that's what I was doing. It doesn't stick, and we're doing these stretching folds. You just kind of pull up. Mine tore a little there. You really don't want to tear your dough, but it happens. And you just do a stretching fold. You just pull it up and fold it over and turn the bowl. And then we're going to cover it up and let it rest for about half an hour. And this is when it hydrates and it starts developing the gluten. Okay. And we did that a couple of times, and after it rested, then we pull it out on the counter. Make sure you have a lightly floured counter, and you're just going to kind of press it out and fold it over, kind of fold it in on the side like wings, and you're shaping it here. And then you pull it against the counter, and it kind of helps get a tension on top of the bread. Kind of makes it tighter across the top. And we're shaping it, and we're going to put it into our banneton. And make sure you do flour your banneton before you put it in there, or it'll stick. So you just, there you go. And some people do a lot of stretch and folds. You can do 3 or 4 sets. But here you see it going into the banneton and just trying to kind of tie the loose ends together there. And then I'm going to use that same shower cap. I'm going to spray a little bit of oil on the inside of it so it doesn't stick. And kind of fluff it up so it's not stuck against the dough. I just put a light coating of oil on the dough, put the cover on it. Let it sit out on the counter for about an hour at room temperature, and then it'll rise a little bit, but not much. And when that time's up, we're going to pop it in the fridge, and it'll stay in there overnight. And you will see it when it comes out here. So it's ready to go sit for an hour and then go in the fridge. Here we are the next day. I've taken it out of the fridge, about a half an hour on the counter. This is rice flour that I'm putting on a piece of parchment, and I do have my Dutch oven heating in the oven, 425 degrees. You can see it pop right out. One quick tip on that banneton, I turn it upside down on the hot stove and let it dry well so we don't have any mold. And now we're going to just cut an expansion slit, and you end up with that little ear that you hear people talk about. And then we're just doing a little design cut on the side, like a little leaf thing. It just helps it not just crack in anywhere. Kind of directs where it'll crack. And it makes it pretty. So our Dutch oven has been inside the oven heating up to 425 degrees. And we're going to pull that out carefully. And we'll just pick up the parchment paper and transfer it into the Dutch oven. Make sure you leave that hot glove on top of that lid because it's easy to forget it's hot and you'll burn yourself. So just pop it in, put the lid back on, and we're going to pop that right in the oven. And we'll leave it with the lid on for about 30 minutes and let it cook. That lid will help trap moisture inside the pot, and then when you cook it at the last without the lid, that's when it'll make that nice crispy crust. So it's been 30 minutes, and now we're going to remove that lid. And close it back up and let it finish cooking. We'll cook it about another 20-25 minutes. You'll just have to check the crust. We kind of like it really crusty. So it's been 20-25 minutes, so we're going to take it out and see what we have. It always smells so good. Just be careful with that hot pot. I'll grab my parchment and transfer it over to my cooling rack. Oh, it turned out so nice. It's beautiful color, crispy. Look at that ear. You can see the other side where we cut like the leaf design. That's a nice loaf. Get a little close-up view. Oh, look at that ear. That's beautiful. You can't see it on this video, but it was very tasty. Had a wonderful crumb.